the 2016 Honda NHL All-Star MVP, scored 2 goals in the tournament and wins as a right-in candidate, John Scott!
This moment is historic for a lot of reasons, and to better explain what I mean, we need to go back to where it all began. After becoming a journeyman throughout the early 2010s, Scott would sign with his 6th NHL team during the summer of 2015. Scott to that point was just a bruiser trying to stay in the league. He wasn't the fastest skater and had next to no offensive abilities, but a year prior, Scott had a career year, scoring a career-high 3 goals. He had next to no expectations signing in Arizona. In fact, he was more of a depth signing. John would play in just 11 games that season with the Coyotes, producing 1 whole point, and would become a healthy scratch for the majority of the season. Until the All-Star game, that is. Back in the 15-16 season, the NHL ran a fan vote to allow the fans to get some of their favorite players into the big event, and fans from all over began to massively campaign to try to get John into the game. Scott would dominate the fan vote, and this was major for the fans, as they were able to come together and make a meme become a reality, making him not just an all-star, but the captain of the Pacific Division. The NHL was obviously not too pleased about this, and honestly, I don't know how they didn't see this coming. They already had an event like this a year prior, when fans from Latvia ganged up to vote in Zemgus Girgensons, so they should have prepared for something to happen again. TSN's Bob McKenzie would tweet out that the NHL and the Coyotes requested that Scott remove himself from the game. But after Scott decided not to back out, some shady things began to take place. Before he even technically won the fan vote, he stated to the media, quote, "Listen, I don't deserve this. Vote for my teammates." But what happened in January of 2016 is what makes many believe that the league was doing everything in their power to keep Scott out of the game. Out of absolutely nowhere, the Coyotes would trade Scott to Montreal, where he would immediately get sent down to the St. John's Ice Caps of the AHL, and speculation began that he would be ruled out due to him being in a completely different division and now in the minor leagues. Coyotes GM Don Maloney insisted the move was a pure business move, but no one was buying that. The fans were pissed and felt cheated, and rightfully so. But 3 days later, it was confirmed by the league themselves that John Scott would officially be the Pacific Division captain, and what happened next was nothing more than poetic justice. Scott would score 2 goals during the game and would help lead his division to the final, winning the entire event and being named All-Star MVP. What really capped off the moment was when Gary Bettman, the man who wanted him out of the game, had to personally give the $1 million check and a brand new car to John in front of thousands of fans that voted him into the game. Sadly, after the 2016 All-Star Game, the fan vote will be patched up, and ironically, the All-Star Game has sort of become irrelevant ever since. Scott wasn't the only strange player to ever be voted into the All-Star Game, as in 1991, when coaches came into play, things got pretty wild fast. Remember Mike Milbury? Well, this was before his disastrous Islanders days, but he still found ways to make millions scratch their heads. Back in the 90s, All-Star teams' rosters were determined by a fan vote, but once the fan votes were tallied up and the roster was revealed, the coaches would be able to pick the remainder of the roster. Milbury happened to be coaching that year, and at the time, it was sorta deserved. He was fresh off a dominant 2-year run as the Bruins head coach and was brought in to coach the Wales Conference. Milbury, once being a tough guy himself, had a profound respect for enforcers and physical play. So while making his selections, controversy erupted as he would pass up on guys like Guy Lafleur and Kirk Muller to select Bruins heavyweight Chris Nilan. Nilan at the time was putting up some solid numbers, but not the ones you would want to see. His most notable statistics were on the penalty sheet, posting 277 penalty minutes in 41 games that season. Seeing a guy like Nilan in an all-star game would have looked so bizarre, yet we can't stop there. Milbury added another tough guy to his roster in Brian Skrudland. The defensive forward was a smart player, but arguably not all-star material. These two being in today's video is sort of a technicality, as unlike everyone else who will be mentioned, these two didn't even suit up once being selected. Chris Nyland would break his ankle, and Scrudlin would also conveniently get injured as well, making them both ineligible to play. But because of Milbury's wacky decisions, he made the league change the way non-starters were decided due to his selections. The NHL would now have a panel decide which non-starters would be eligible to play in the game, which leads us into our next group of players who were all from the same team. Almost every All-Star game from the 1990s had some weird and obscure players being thrown into the mix, mainly due to the massive amount of expanding the NHL was doing at the time. And in 1992, the league would introduce two new teams in the Tampa Bay Lightning and Ottawa Senators. In our current All-Star game format, there is usually one player per team making an appearance, with sometimes more than one, to fill out the rosters. And it was the exact same way back in 1993. However, since the league had a bunch of new teams, some weaker names would enter the lineup, and sadly, the Ottawa Senators fell victim to this scenario. For some reason, the awful 93 Senators not only had one, but two players from their team become all-stars in two different ways. First, let's look at who was originally named to the roster. That man was Peter Sidorkovich. Now, a few years before, goaltender John Garrett was the worst goaltender to become an all-star, only having 6 wins under his belt. But Sidorkovich had him beat, becoming the worst netminder to play in the game with a record of 4-32-3. Now, this isn't exactly his fault, as the early Ottawa Senators weren't exactly the greatest of teams, but seeing him be named an all-star was baffling. And to make things even more crazy, he was only the first Ottawa Senator to be named to the team. Remember the new rule change we just mentioned? Well, the league honored veteran players via a commissioner's pick, which allowed them to select a veteran player to be able to get some recognition. And one of those picks was Sens defenseman and journeyman Brad Marsh. Marsh was a defensive defenseman, but he only tallied 23 goals in over 1,000 NHL games. He was durable, but not an all-star worthy player, especially at the time of his selection. Of course, both players would get the last laugh, as Marsh would score a goal and Sidorkovich would walk away with the win. So I guess things really do happen for a reason. For this last portion of the video, we need to look at a format that made games of the early 2000s absolutely insane. We need to look back at USA versus the world. This idea had potential, but came with some issues. The NHL was reaping the benefits of its flashy, fast, and bright European superstars, but they soon began to realize that they might not have enough of them to fill out an entire roster. And this became evident almost right away, giving us numerous head-scratching picks to go over. Names such as Espen Knutson would appear in the mix, but we'll be talking about two players in particular. First, let's head back to 2001. The World team needed to fill in some empty roster spots, specifically on defense, so they would call upon an elite defenseman whose career was spectacular. That player was none other than Marcus Ragnarsson. Who? Yeah, that's probably what you guys are thinking right now. Ragnarsson was surprisingly elite and did have a spectacular career, but only at the start of it. He's only notable for a good rookie season where he would tally 36 points and receive some Calder votes, but besides that, his career was pretty lackluster. He only had 15 points when he was chosen to play in the game, but this wasn't a Senator scenario, as the Sharks were pretty solid that season. It was just a side effect from the US versus the world format. Ragnarsson did begin a slight trend, however, as soon after, more defensive defensemen began getting selected to play in the game. Ragnarsson may have been a confusing selection, but a year before him, there was an all-star who will forever go down in history as being the worst of all time. As the second player to be affected by the crazy format was Peter Buzek. The 2000 All-Star Game would be the first to feature the Atlanta Thrashers, and similar to the Sidorkovich selection, since Atlanta was so bad, someone had to be selected, and that guy happened to be Buzek. See, he wasn't that bad of a player. He was arguably one of Atlanta's better players, producing 19 points and 5 goals during the 2000 season. You know, come to think of it, that isn't really saying much, but the reason why Buzek is regarded as the worst selection selection is because at the time, he only played in 4 NHL games in his entire career, and after a strange appearance, he would begin having injury problems, only playing in 14 more games with Atlanta over the course of the next 2 years. The All-Star Game is meant to be fun and crazy, but as shown in today's video, one shift in the rules or format can cause a massive change in the talent that'll be showcased, as all it takes is one decision, injury, or a fan vote gone wrong to make a lasting impact, all while pissing the league off.